Alright, quick one before we start. You may or may not be aware that I've actually taken this video down and re-uploaded it. And yeah, I know how that looks, like someone's had a word. They haven't, and you'll soon see Bambu hasn't said anything, because if they had, they'd have had more to say. This is not coerced. Doing this was my call for the sake of making an accurate video that properly represents this product. And the short version is, the original didn't land the value properly. I've tidied a few bits, cleaned up some tired rambling, and I've changed the ending. But I'll proudly say, the critique is still the same. All of it. Especially the nitpicks, but the recommendation wasn't right, and it's not right on you guys, the viewers, for me to leave that up when it's getting so many views. I'm not hiding anything I previously said. The original video is still there if you want to compare. There's a link in the description. Anyway, let's get into it. Here's a critical review of a very Bambu printer from a card-carrying Bambu fanboy. I've never been shy about my fondness for Bambu as a brand. They aren't the best printers for everyone, but in my humble opinion, they are the best printers for the majority of users out there. The people who, just like me, care less about the politics and care more about the purchase of a reliable machine of high value and with at least reputable quality. I've been accused of loving these machines for nothing more than I'm under contract to say good things, or they're buying my opinion, because it can't possibly be for any of the exact reasons I've said in my videos about them. You know, the fact that I, like the vast majority of average users, just really like them the most for what they've delivered and how they deliver it a step above everyone else. So when I say finally, I mean finally I can prove I'm willing to be less favourable when I feel the product they deliver has implemented its USP features in ways we'd expect of lesser brands. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh, let me rephrase. The features of this machine that put it above the P2S in the Bambu lineup have been implemented in such a way that this simply isn't the Bambu that made Bambu Bambu. It's not a bad printer, far from it. In fact, it's a very good printer, but there are just too many ifs, buts and howevers that prevent this from being the must-have machine that the X1 was. This will suit a very specific user type only. But regardless of that, with the current price, at least at the time of recording, being just marginally above the P2S, if you were looking at that, you're now going to buy this one instead anyway. Hi, I'm Ross and this is Fohammer Videos. Okay, I'm going to gloss over some lesser stuff so we can get to the meat of it. Unboxing, as always, is top quality. As you unbox, just scan the QR code on the box and watch a video of how to take this out of the box and set it up. Even if this isn't your first printer, that is handy. Remove all the foam, unclip the cable ties. If you got a combo unit, as most people will, unscrew the screws marked with big red rings to first get the AMS out of the printer, and then unsecure the screws holding down the bed for shipping. Attach the screen, and if you don't have the combo, attach either or both of the filament reel holders to the back, and then you're done. Well, with the exception of two new elements, which I want to leave as a surprise just for a little bit. But if you miss any of this, the printer will walk you through it and its self-calibration the first time you boot it up, assuming of course the it you didn't miss was attaching the screen. Aesthetics-wise, the silhouette of this is identical to the P2S, but there have been some cosmetic changes on the outside, such as the casing being a much darker grey, the same as the H2C. Also, like the H2C and D, this now has Perspex windows on the sides, but here the Bambu logos don't light up, which I'm fine with. Now, when it comes to ports, specifically the rear panel, this differs from the P2S. However, just be aware there are now two revisions of the P2S rear panels depending on when you bought it. But for more info on that, check out my P2S review. So we're going to go bottom to top because reasons. The power port with the rocker switch is on the bottom left corner. It's also got a waste chute in the middle, slightly to the right, and a dual feed buffer in the center. One of the questions I asked in my P2 review was what is the point of the 2-to-1 buffer? And that was a two-part question. First, I meant why have a large mechanical 2-to-1 splitter when the 4-to-1 splitters are dirt cheap? The other question was what the buffer actually does, and it turns out these detect the tension in the line and then instruct the AMS units to feed faster or slower, and that reduces wear on the extruder gears, stopping them from having to drag everything through. So that's cool. However, this sticky out module does have two 6-pin ports in the top of it. There's also two filament inlets for each of the two nozzles. And yeah, I haven't said it yet, but I think it's obvious to most people, the X2D is a dual nozzle printer. Sort of. We'll come back to that in a lot of detail later. With these inlet ports, one is a fixed coupler like on the P2S, and there's also a separate loose PTFE tube which, okay, I'm going to come back to that one shortly. Before that, I want to talk about the 3 open grills on the rear panel. There's 2 small ones on the right side for cooling the electronics, and another which is the same as the updated panel for the P2. This is a large chamber exhaust hole. Now included in the box with this machine is the external exhaust fan, which is basically a big external fan with its own carbon filter. And this simply slides into the back of the machine and gets its data and power feed from the 6-pin port in the top of the buffer. So, going back to those PTFE inlet tubes, the fixed coupler is for the left nozzle of the printhead only. The loose tube is for the right nozzle, and this connects to what Bambu are calling the auxiliary extruder. The data and power cable for this is sticking out the back of the machine when you get it, so connect that up and simply push and slide the extruder into the back of the machine. Feed in that PTFE tube, but then to lock it into place, you need to screw in the little nut. Now from there, the buffer on the back has 2 PTFE tubes already coming from it. So one now connects to that coupler for the left nozzle, and the other connects to the auxiliary extruder for the right. Now for those of us who aren't Bambu and have been around 3D printing for a while, what this is actually called is a Bowden extruder, and I'll come on to the performance of that in a bit. But for those of you who already have experience with Bowden extruders from older machines, in order to answer the question you're already wanting to ask, yes. Anyway, once everything's connected, it does look like a bit of a jumbled mess, and these external mechanics, meaning the fan and extruder, stick out and visually come across as bolt-ons rather than elements more cleanly integrated into the machine itself. And this isn't bad, it's just one of a few things in this product that are not what I've come to expect from Bambu. Going to the front, we've got a glass door. It doesn't swing fully open, but it's mostly wide enough. And we've also got a glass lid. The USB port is on the top behind the screen. Low profile USB drives are ideal here, and the screen itself will tilt upwards slightly to change the viewing angle, but it won't tilt down. Moving inside the machine, I'm going to move the tool head to last so we can spend more time talking about it. And you've got your usual stuff like a nozzle wiper and waste chute on the left side, but this now has a secondary one with the tool switcher on the right side. Now we've got the same size spring steel PEI plate that's been on the whole last generation of Bambu printers, and that's 256 by 256 millimeters in area. However, here, as shown on the front of the plate, the build height is now 260. Now this is one of those things that's going to sound like nitpicking. Well, it is, but it's not nitpicking the 4mm extra. It's about what's presented versus what you really get. Bambu say 260mm, but that's only true on the left nozzle. The moment you use the right, you're back to 256. And this is exactly the kind of silly little thing that I've criticised other brands for when they advertise the best case numbers up front, but then have to walk it back with caveats after you've been sold on it. And I often call this stuff bullshit advertising. So my issue isn't an extra 4mm, it's that Bambu built their reputation on standing out from other brands by keeping things simple, basic and clear. And this, like all of the bolt-on modules, just isn't classic Bambu. Yes, it's a tiny point, but it's exactly the sort of small thing that adds up, and if I'd made this same complaint about another brand, which I often have, I know from that experience people would be right there with pitchforks at the ready. Now, the Z mechanism runs on 3 lead screws and 3 guide rods, 2 at the front in each corner and 1 at the back, with the rear guide rod hidden behind the chassis. And whilst the rear lead screw is more accessible here than on the H2 series, it is still blocked a bit by how narrow the gap is in the plastics. So when it comes to maintaining it and cleaning this screw, it's a little more awkward than I think it could be. Now, the fun part is the internal heating and cooling. So, on the right, we've got the auxiliary part cooling fan. When printing cool materials like PLA and PETG, mechanical vents inside this will actually open and the machine sucks in fresh cool air from the holes in the base where the right side grab handle is. This keeps the chamber cool whilst keeping the lid on and the door closed so those materials don't warp or sag. And when printing materials that like warmer environments such as ABS and the like, those vents close and the machine will then suck air inside through the carbon filter in the back right side of the machine. It'll pass that filtered air into the blower fan, which will then push it back into the chamber through a separate port in the wall of that part cooling fan. This air will continue to recirculate, forcing more passes over the carbon, giving more chances to capture VOCs as the air flows. And we also now have that auxiliary exhaust on the back that we mentioned earlier, which will suck air out of the chamber over its own carbon block. But of course, that only allows for one airflow pass. So again, just to correct something I got wrong in my P2S review because I misread it, I actually believed that the option was either internal filtration or exhaust only. You couldn't do one then the other. But an option in the UI shows that the printer will circulate during printing. That gives us more passes over the internal filter, and that also helps to retain heat. And the external exhaust will only run at the end of a print to pull out any remaining VOCs before you open the printer. Also, you can connect a hose to this rear exhaust. Now, on the left side, and surprising almost no one, we have what looks like the same device. But for anyone who's seen any P2S review, this is a heater. And this was quite obviously coming because the P2 had the mounting points for it on the inside wall of the plastic chassis. And this heater does exactly what we wanted it to. It'll heat up to 65 degrees Celsius. Now, how that performs and how it helps prints will come too soon. Another element to mention is the camera. This is, as always, in the top left corner, and this can be used for remote monitoring prints via the app. And if, and only if, you've got a USB drive installed, despite the machine having its own internal memory, you can record time lapses which can then be exported in 1080 resolution. Now, as I mentioned before, and this is true of all the new machines in the P, the X and the H series, the angle of this camera can slightly see into your room. For anyone who wants a bit more privacy, it'd be nice to see an add-on which has a blinker to block that part of the view. Though, this version of the camera now has a swivelly privacy filter, just like on the A1 printers. Something that I kinda wished for in my P2S review, but I'll be honest, that was cheating on my part. I wasn't being precognizant. I actually tested both of these machines at the same time, and that was one of the reasons why I delayed my P2S review. I knew this was coming and wanted to do a head-to-head. And in that earlier review, I actually had to crop in quite tight so you couldn't see the X2 in the frame because I was still under NDA on this when releasing that video. But the point of this head-to-head was to compare the printing test results, which I actually found interesting. But first, the tool head. Okay, as we know, we've got two nozzles, and I was super excited when I first saw this. Not only is this dual nozzle like the H2, but the tool head is significantly smaller, meaning lighter, so ideally faster. In fact, the spec sheet says the maximum speed is 1000 millimeters a second, though to be fair, this is only maximum movement speed. Material printing speed is limited by the material flow rate and cooling, which is pretty much the same as every other printer out there. But the way they made this dual nozzle head smaller is by taking out the extruder mechanism from the head itself and moving it to the back of the printer. I'm jumping ahead. Let's cover the basics first. This is very much like the tool head from the P2S. The faceplate comes off easy, the nozzles can both be swapped out with nothing more than just removing the silicone sock and unclamping them. And these nozzles are the ones used in all the H series and the P2, meaning there's already plenty of nozzles available, including third-party nozzles that already exist. They can all be swapped in. One of my favourite parts of Bambu's ecosystem is the cross-compatibility of components like these and build plates, though one element they added for sex appeal is this light-up logo across the top. But coming back to the two nozzles, and just so this isn't misunderstood, Bambu have been very clear with me, and I'll be clear with you, that this is more of an auxiliary support nozzle than a true dual nozzle like the X2D. So for those of us new to this, we need a quick overview of printer tech, something I don't typically cover, but understanding this is key to operation. You see, there's generally two types of extruder on 3D printers, and for as long as I've been 3D printing with FDM printers, that's about 3-4 years, I've only used what are called direct drive extruders. This is where the gears that push and pull the filament sit directly inside the tool head above the nozzle. I actually took this mechanism apart on my P2 due to a clog. And direct drive has been commonly adopted because that direct push and pull motion, vertically and almost immediately above the nozzle, results in a more accurate flow and retraction of what goes out or doesn't go out of the nozzle. This auxiliary extruder, or Bowden extruder, is less accurate because as the gears push and pull filament, rather than this having the more one-to-one relationship with the flow in the nozzle, it can actually first push and pull the slack in the PTFE tube between the extruder and the print head, or, more likely, be affected by just how stretchy the material you're printing with is. When it comes to the PTFE slack on this, they actually use locking nuts rather than press-fit clamps, and that mitigates a good portion of that slacking effect. But the results of this are still clear. Running 2 retraction tests, one on each nozzle, we can clearly see the increased stringing from that right nozzle, though this can likely be dialed in better if you plan to go through the manual calibration in the slicer. And I do need to be fair, these are the initial profiles for the machine, as in I've got it pre-released, they're still working on it. We know from Bambu's history they're going to continue to improve these things over time. But that test really only serves to prove there is a noticeable difference. In practical prints such as these benches, one printed on the left nozzle, the other printed on the right, and I genuinely can't see a difference. And I'm going to show multicolour print shortly. But the point is, this can still never be as accurate as a direct extruder. So Bambu have very specifically stated that this is really intended more for support material or just PLA. And this is part of the review I've had to change for accuracy, because I actually got a pre-release document separating different materials into 3 categories of supported, not recommended, and outright not supported, but the published documentation on the website changes that to supported and use with caution. Then there's the impact of physical print volume. When using the right nozzle, the print height is limited from 260 to the more standard 256mm. The Y dimension is the same at 256, but the X dimension is now shrunk to only 235mm on the right side of the plate, with the remaining 21mm on the left side of the plate feeling redundant. And in fact, my biggest issue with this limit is the same as it is in the H2 machines with multiple nozzles, and that's the slicer. A function I commonly use on all of these machines is auto layout, and for all of the machines with these exclusion zones, that function always treats this area as unusable. It moves models out of it even when just doing single material prints. So you end up just not using those areas, and so often this means the printer behaves as though its true print volume feels like 235 by 256 by 256. It feels like you're getting less than what you're paying for unless you want to manually piss about moving things. I also need to say that this printer doesn't work with the pen plotter, drag cutter, or laser add-on, the latter of which I think is the least desirable. And my point is, they already have the software, so why not just make this an optional add-on? Yeah, only a portion of people would want them, but it's still a value that other brands simply don't offer. And the more Bambu includes these features, the more designs people would make, and the more these tools would then become desired. So my question to you, the audience, is why not? As for the AMS, I'm just going to gloss over this. I'm not going to do a deep dive. It's a separate item. I probably need to do a separate video. With the combo, you get one AMS2 Pro, which is an automated 4 material loader. And while you can attach this to either nozzle, it makes the most sense attaching it to the left, with the right nozzle being the dedicated support material. Though, with these support materials commonly needing to be dried out, it would make sense for Bambu to at least offer a bundle where at least one AMS HT is included too. And I've said many times I wish they'd make a dual reel AMS, and I'd rather have one of those in each side personally. I still don't like multicolour printing when any amount of waste is involved, so using this as a single colour printer with dedicated support just makes the most sense to me. And for that, the ideal setup is 2 AMS HTs either side, mainly just so that we've always got a reel spare for the machine to automatically fail over to on run out to keep the printer printing. On the software side, we've got the same UI that has become standard across Bambu's second generation of machines. It's clean, intuitive, and I genuinely can't think of anything more I'd want on this or anything to critique. And the same with the slicer, it's very much geared towards the average user. But as I mentioned before, the approach to multi-nozzle adds some minor complexity. And when it comes to support material on this machine, the slicer will actually recognize if a compatible material is installed in the printer and recommend a configuration to apply this as an interface. So on the most part, again, there's very little to critique. But some things that I would like to see added is the ability to store more files on the printer, or even have the last few time lapses stored on the printer without a USB drive. And I'd also like to be able to send multiple jobs from the slicer to either the machine or a cloud-based print queue, so that as soon as one print is done, all I have to do is click next and see it immediately start the next print, something other brands have been doing for a couple of years now. Okay, when it comes to print quality, this has been great, and I managed to test multiple materials again directly against the P2S. PLA was absolutely fine, the benches I showed earlier were solid, and I also printed this massive chainsaw that I showed off in my previous video, and this was fully printed on this printer. These are going to be coming out soon, once again from the Eternal Forge, and it fits together without screws or anything else needed. Once again, I don't work with these guys, I make nothing of it, I just love the way they build models, and I want to encourage more of this kind of thing. I also did 2 multicolour dragons using both nozzles, and they came out great. A 16-hour print on the P2S is only 9.5 on the X2. Now obviously this result will vary depending on what you print, but you can test all this yourself for free before buying the machines by just downloading the slicer, because the time estimates are pretty accurate. I then went on to testing PETG, ABS, ASA, polycarbonate and nylon. Now PETG, ABS and ASA were mostly fine, decent bridging and smooth extrusion. At the very least they were in line with what I expect for these materials, though I was consistently seeing a visible layer step line around the 60-degree overhang on all of these parts, which then had a knock-on effect to the underside of these overhangs from that point on. Now again, these are still very early profiles with beta software, although it may be that I've actually got some damage to one of my lead screws around this exact height. I can't see any, but I'm still diagnosing what's causing this issue. I am, however, experienced enough to know that this is very much an individual me problem and very unlikely to be a global massive issue with the printer. So I wouldn't worry about it, I'm just fully disclosing my experience, and because of this, all of these materials, especially on overhangs, actually came off much better on my P2 in that review. Unfortunately, that means I can't properly show the value of the chamber heater, and also this will also be different for different people. I use this in a very normal room, at room temperature, so ABS and ASA don't exactly need a heater to get a successful print, at least visually anyway. But that heat will help with the bonding strength of each layer to the last. The point is, if you're in a colder environment, then the heater may be more necessary. When it came to clear polycarbonate and nylon, these are both materials that need a brim in order to stay adhered to the bed. In fact, my first print with nylon actually curled up without this, but I was also able to print that material on the normal P2S so long as I used a brim. Polycarbonate, however, wouldn't print without curling on my P2, no matter what I added. And now so far, this is the only printer where I've managed to print PC properly. But coming back to that earlier point, you might be looking at this thinking, oh well, if the only material that struggles on this is PC and I don't need that, I'll just get a P2. Yeah, fair enough. Just remember that visually printing without curling is not the same as layer adherence, because the layers will stay slightly melted when printed in warmer environments, meaning the layers will stick to each other better. So a heater also has an impact on layer adhesion strength. But yeah, if you aren't after engineering grade materials, if you're just like me printing props, toys and fun little widgets, then for basic stuff like PLA, PETG, maybe some ABS or ASA occasionally, and you've got a warm enough room to keep your printer in, then yeah, the P2 will be plenty of printer for you. You really don't need this. An extra thing, the X2 uses 1.5mm pitch belts instead of the P2's 2mm. I actually learned this from various other people's reviews, and that means the distance between the teeth on the belts. And this change helps to reduce VFAs. Now honestly, as an everyday user, I struggle to notice VFAs on any printer. To me, they're far less visible than layer lines. But this is an improvement for the people who will notice. Also, the max nozzle temp here is 300 degrees Celsius, so whilst this printer's aimed more at engineering users, it still seems there will be some third-party ones that this machine simply doesn't cover. And then on the support material and the whole benefit of that, I tested various materials with their equivalent interfaces, PLA, PETG, and ABS. And when using an interface, not only did supports come away much easier, in fact with ABS, normal support removal actually destroyed the part, but with an interface they came away much cleaner too. This is the very obvious benefit of being able to have a second nozzle for support material. And even without any of this in, it told me in the slicer to use PETG as an interface for PLA, and that worked great. So again, on the surface, the value is clear when you can use it. When? And that brings us to the revised conclusion. Let's put this straight. Right now, as I republish this, the X2D is $100 or 70 Great British pounds more than the P2S. And I say right now because that could change, and this is one of the reasons why I typically don't cover price in my reviews. So if it does change, let's do a quick sense check on the practical differences. The X2D is a P2S with a heater, more precise belts, a bolt-on exhaust fan, and an extra nozzle, though with limited function and coverage. And to be honest, any one of these features alone is probably worth the current price hike. Regardless, right now, with that price difference, for me it's a decision more driven by why not, because with all these features I'd rather have them and not need them than need them and not have them. I know the feeling, guys. I'm still grumpy about getting my Steam Deck just before the OLED was announced. But even with the value, I can't pretend I'm happy with this printer either, because by Bambu's own standards, it's a f***ing mess of elements. It's like the 90s video game consoles and handhelds with all their daft bolt-ons. This feels far less like that clean, from the ground up Bambu level of design, and more like, well, we've got the P2S chassis locked, now let's reactively cram in or on as many new features as we can. But it's the extra nozzle that annoys me the most. It's not even the Bowden setup. That has its limits, but I can take it. For me, it's the inconsistent build plate coverage. If both nozzles reached the full bed, I'd love it. Love it. But that partially usable area so frequently becomes a soft limit, or just something I have to regularly work around. I can't use the support interface material at all if part of a large model that needs supporting sits in that exclusion zone. I have to rearrange pre-organized parts that people have spent years setting up and uploading to MakerWorld, which used to be just download and click print. Or I have to split one print job into multiple print jobs because everything no longer fits on one plate. I think the best analogy why this bothers me is voice assistants like Alexa and Siri. Great concept, but they don't work 100% of the time. So, and we've all experienced this, using the feature starts with a bit of frustration, then you're repeating yourself, then you're basically shouting at it, and eventually you just stop using it to avoid any potential frustration. There's a reason the path of least resistance is the one most frequently trodden. Now obviously this impact depends on what you print, and people throw out the term Flexi Dragon printer like it's an insult, but I'd comfortably argue that the majority of Bambu's user base is printing these sorts of things. It's not an insult. We know what we print, we enjoy it. But anyway, the thing is, and as I've said throughout, I am a Bambu fanboy. And it's not because they pay me or any of that crap people come up with just to hate on Bambu. I am a fan because I love them. In my opinion, they've made some of the best machines out there. Quality, versatility, long-term support, ecosystem. For those reasons and more, I think they absolutely trounce the competition. I've stood by that, even through firmware gate, and I still do. And a big part of that has always been simplicity, clean, tidy, and the phrase "it just works" extended beyond the hardware into the ecosystem and community they built. MakerWorld. It's been one of the key arguments I've made against other brands, and when I bring it up there, the vast majority of people always agree. But we can't use that against competitors and ignore it here, because if Bambu stop pushing their level of excellence in product delivery, the sheen wears off, the premium becomes harder to justify, and people will start looking at alternatives. I like multiple nozzles, I love them, but in my opinion, this approach here just isn't the way forward. It feels like a stopgap to what the final solution may eventually be, and somewhere between this and Vortec, Bambu seem to be doing everything they can to avoid making a proper tool changer. And I worry that it's just because other brands got there first. just like Prusa avoiding helpful things like nozzle wipers and waste chutes. The way they've done this dual nozzle approach has limits that simply don't exist elsewhere. So yeah, this has value. Financially, it's probably the best value printer Bambu sells. But I have to be on record to say that this feels like a messy stopgap to what people actually want. And to me, that's a proper tool changer. Just from Bambu, because they'd make it the best. At the very least, it should be a machine where these features are integrated cleanly and without caveats, because this method dilutes that ecosystem unity. And I can't be the only one thinking this. Surely even the people buying this, you also wish it was done properly, right? Tell me, what do you think? I'm not right about everything. What is it you want? Where do you think this sits as a Bambu printer, and where do you think they should go next? Because to me, yeah, while this is great, woohoo, this just isn't the Bambu I fell in love with. So that's it, guys. Again, to close, I hope you can respect my decision to reframe this review, at least for the sake of accuracy. But I think we're all at least in agreement right now that it proves that I'm not going to sugarcoat objectivity just because I'm personally a Bambu fan. Again, I've left the original version up just for the sake of full disclosure. If you want to watch that, there's a link in the description. And if you do decide to buy the X2D and appreciate the clarity of me showing you what this actually is, then I've got affiliate links below the video. Using them will net me a commission at no cost to you, and that is how I can afford to run the channel. I don't like it. I think I've driven that point home ad nauseum. But yes, of course I'd still buy it, wishing it was more. Both can be true. Until next time, Fohammer out.